Sofia had always been accustomed to luxury. Her husband Alexander was a wealthy entrepreneur who had built an empire from scratch. He was the kind of man who could control every situation, always confident, always composed. And Sofia was his perfect trophy wife, living in a mansion filled with everything she could ever want, except the one thing she craved most: freedom. Despite the glamorous facade, Sofia felt trapped. Alexander's love was more of an obsession, a suffocating presence that shadowed her every move. He demanded perfection, perfection in how she looked, how she spoke, and even how she smiled in front of his business associates. But there was no genuine affection, only control. It was during one of his endless business trips that Sofia found her escape. Leon, a charming, carefree bartender at an upscale hotel she visited for a charity event. What began as harmless flirting quickly escalated into something more. Leon was different. He saw her not as an accessory, but as a person with desires and dreams. He listened to her, understood her, and most importantly, he gave her a glimpse of the life she had longed for. Their affair blossomed in secret, meetings in hidden places, messages exchanged under pseudonyms. Leon became her confidant, the one person who knew the real Sofia beneath the polished surface. But their passion came with a dangerous price. Alexander, despite his many flaws, wasn't a fool. He had his ways of knowing things, and Sofia knew it was only a matter of time before her double life unraveled. One night, after a particularly passionate encounter, Sofia sat with Leon in his tiny studio apartment, far from the glitz and glamour of her usual surroundings. They lay together, the sheets tangled around them, and for a fleeting moment everything felt perfect. But Leon's question shattered the illusion. "Why don't you just leave him?" he asked softly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. Sofia hesitated. "I can't," she whispered. "He'll ruin me. He'll make sure I walk away with nothing." But Leon didn't relent. "Then take something of his, make it even. You know how much money he has stashed away. If you had that, we could run away, start fresh somewhere." Sofia knew he was right. She had thought about it 1,000 times. Alexander kept a substantial amount of cash and valuables hidden away in a secret safe at home. Money that wasn't tied up in business deals or frozen by prenuptial agreements. Money he used for his own illegal dealings. Money that would never be missed until it was gone. Over the next few weeks, Sofia's visits to Leon became less about passion and more about planning. She memorized the safe's code, numbers connected to a date only Alexander and she knew, and rehearsed the steps she'd need to take to access it. Every night she would lie awake, imagining how it would feel to finally escape, to be free from Alexander's grip. The night she chose to act felt like any other. Alexander had left on a late flight to Dubai for a business meeting that would keep him away for at least 3 days. He kissed her on the cheek, that cold, detached gesture she had grown so accustomed to, and told her not to wait up. The moment his car disappeared down the long driveway, Sofia set her plan into motion. She slipped into Alexander's private office, her hands trembling as she entered the code into the safe. The heavy door swung open, revealing stacks of cash, jewelry, and something she hadn't expected: documents, folders marked with names she didn't recognize, and numbers that made her head spin. She ignored them, her eyes locked on the money. Quickly, she stuffed as much as she could into a duffel bag, leaving behind only enough so that it wouldn't be immediately obvious. As she zipped the bag shut, her phone buzzed. A text from Leon. "You okay? Almost there?" She smiled, her heart pounding with adrenaline. This was it. She was really doing it. With the bag slung over her shoulder, she hurried through the house, every creak of the floorboards making her wince. She reached the garage, opened the door, and slipped into her car. The engine roared to life and she sped down the driveway, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She didn't look back. Leon was waiting for her at a small motel on the outskirts of the city, just as they had planned. The moment she saw him, she felt a surge of relief. They were going to make it. They were really going to be free. But as she rushed into his arms, the smile on his face faltered. "Leon, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. He looked over her shoulder, and she turned to see what had caught his attention. Her heart dropped. Two black SUVs pulled into the motel's parking lot, headlights glaring in the darkness. Men in suits stepped out, their faces expressionless, but she knew who they were, Alexander's men. "No, no, no," Sofia whispered, backing away. Leon grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the car. "We have to go. Now." But before they could move, the men were on them. Leon tried to fight, but it was useless. They overpowered him easily, shoving him to the ground. One of them grabbed Sofia, his grip like a vice around her wrist. "Where do you think you're going, Mrs. Volkov?" a deep voice asked. She looked up, and her blood ran cold. Standing there, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, was Alexander. He looked calm, almost serene, but the fury in his eyes was unmistakable. "Oh, Alexander," she couldn't find the words. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" He glanced at the duffel bag on the ground, then back at her. "Taking my money, running off with him." He gestured dismissively toward Leon, who was now being restrained by two of the men. I just wanted to be free," Sofia stammered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Free?" Alexander's laugh was low, almost a growl. "There is no freedom for you, Sofia. You belong to me." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And now you're going to pay for this little stunt. Both of you." Sofia's heart pounded as she struggled against the man holding her, but it was no use. She watched in horror as Alexander nodded to his men. One of them drew a gun, pressing it against Leon's temple. "No," she screamed. "Please, don't." "Shh," Alexander murmured, placing a finger against her lips. "This is what happens when you betray me." The gunshot echoed through the night, and Sofia's scream was drowned out by the deafening sound. Leon's body crumpled to the ground, lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. Everything seemed to slow down. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Alexander's hand tightened on her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Now, you're going to come home with me, Sofia," he said softly, his tone gentle but his eyes hard as steel. "And you're going to learn what it means to be mine." The men shoved her into the back of the SUV, and as the car sped away from the motel, Sofia felt a cold emptiness settle over her. She had lost everything, her freedom, her lover, and her hope. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage once more, trapped by a man who would never let her go. And as they drove back to the mansion, she knew that whatever punishment Alexander had in store for her, it would be worse than anything she could have imagined. This was just the beginning of her real nightmare. The ride back to the mansion was suffocating. The SUV's interior was silent, save for the faint hum of the engine and the rhythmic tapping of Alexander's fingers against the armrest. Sofia stared blankly out the window, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Every breath felt like a knife twisting in her chest. The image of Leon's lifeless body, his blood pooling on the cold ground, was seared into her mind. She wanted to scream, to cry out, but her voice was trapped somewhere deep inside. Alexander didn't say a word as they pulled into the long driveway of their estate. The mansion loomed ahead, its lights blazing like a beacon of despair. The moment the car stopped, Alexander's men yanked her out roughly. He stepped out slowly, adjusting his cufflinks as if they had just returned from an ordinary evening out. "Take her to the basement," he ordered in a cold, detached tone, "and make sure she doesn't leave until I say so." The men gripped her arms and began dragging her toward the house. Sofia struggled, but it was useless. They were too strong. Her legs buckled beneath her as they pulled her down the stairs into a dark, cold room she had never seen before. It was stark and empty, save for a single chair in the center and a small table beside it. One of the men pushed her into the chair, fastening her wrists to the armrests with heavy leather straps. Sofia's heart pounded as they secured her ankles, the cold leather biting into her skin. Panic surged through her, but she forced herself to look up, meeting Alexander's gaze as he stepped in and shut the door behind him. He stood in front of her, his face expressionless, eyes narrowed. "You've disappointed me, Sofia," he said softly. "I gave you everything, everything, and yet you decided to throw it all away. For him. I'm sorry, Sofia choked on her words. Please, I just wanted to be happy. Alexander's eyes flashed with something dark and dangerous. Happy? You thought you'd find happiness by betraying me? By stealing from me? He shook his head slowly, his lips curling into a cruel smile. No, Sofia, you're going to understand exactly what you've done. He gestured to the table, where she now noticed a small, sleek laptop. He opened it and turned the screen toward her. Sofia's eyes widened in shock as she saw the feed from multiple security cameras, inside the mansion, outside, even the garage where she had packed her car to escape. You see, Sofia, I've always known everything, he murmured. I watched you sneaking around, watched you running to him. I let you think you were outsmarting me because I wanted to see just how far you would go. He clicked on one of the files, and her stomach turned. It was a video of her and Leon, taken from the night they had first met at the hotel bar. Then another video, this one in the small apartment they had rented, where they had made love for the first time. Her betrayal was laid out in vivid detail, every touch, every whispered promise of love captured and stored. Stop, please. Just stop, Sofia whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut. But Alexander didn't stop. He played video after video, each one a dagger to her heart. He wanted her to feel it, to see herself through his eyes, the traitor, the liar, the woman who had dared to cross him. When he finally closed the laptop, he crouched down beside her, his voice low and venomous. Now, Sofia, you're going to repay me for what you took. You're going to learn what it means to be mine again, to submit to my rules, and if you don't... He trailed off, reaching out to gently brush a tear from her cheek. Well, let's just say I know other ways to make you suffer. Sofia shuddered, fear clawing at her throat. What do you want from me? She whispered. I want you to confess, he replied simply, to admit what you did, to say you were wrong, that you'll never disobey me again. I'll say whatever you want, Sofia sobbed. Just please, let me go. Alexander's smile widened. Let you go? Oh no, my darling. You're not going anywhere. You're going to stay here, right in this house, where I can keep an eye on you. And every day, you're going to earn back the trust you destroyed. For the next few days, Sofia's life turned into a twisted nightmare. Alexander kept her confined to a single room, no phone, no access to the outside world. He monitored her every move, dictating when she could eat, when she could sleep, even when she could speak. He made her recount every detail of her affair, every secret rendezvous, until she felt like she was being flayed alive by her own words. But that wasn't the worst of it. One morning she woke to find a letter placed on her bedside table. It was written in a neat, unfamiliar handwriting. As she read, the blood drained from her face. Mrs. Volkov, my deepest condolences for your loss. Your husband has informed me of the tragic passing of Mr. Leon Rivers. I hope you can find peace in this difficult time. Regards, Dr. Samuel Roberts, psychiatrist. Sofia's hands trembled as she realized what this meant. Leon was dead, officially dead. Alexander had erased him, made it look like a tragic accident or maybe even suicide. He hadn't just killed Leon, he had erased him from her life completely. There would be no investigation, no questions asked. It was as if Leon had never existed. She crumpled the letter, tears streaming down her face. He had taken everything from her, left her completely alone. There was no escape, no way out. She was trapped in this gilded prison with a man who would control her until the end of her days. But even in her despair, a spark of defiance flickered deep inside her. She couldn't let it end like this. She couldn't let him win. If there was one thing Alexander had underestimated, it was her resolve. She had come this far, risked everything once. She could do it again. Over the following weeks, Sofia played the part of the obedient wife. She said all the right things, expressed remorse, and even pretended to be grateful when Alexander began, rewarding her with small freedoms, a walk around the garden, a meal outside the room. She listened to his every word, nodding and smiling, all the while planning her next move. She knew Alexander still believed she was broken, that she would never dare cross him again. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated her desire for revenge. Late one night, when the house was silent and dark, Sofia slipped out of her room. She had found a way to override the door's lock mechanism weeks ago, studying it every time she had been left alone. She crept through the hallways, her heart pounding in her chest, until she reached Alexander's office. The safe was there, just as it had always been, but this time she wasn't after money. This time she was looking for something far more valuable: evidence. She knew Alexander had secrets, things hidden away that could destroy him. She just needed to find it. It took her nearly an hour, but finally, buried beneath stacks of documents, she found what she was looking for: a folder filled with contracts, photos, emails detailing illegal business dealings, payoffs, and bribes. It was everything she needed to bring him down. With trembling hands, she took pictures of every page, every incriminating detail. Then she carefully replaced the folder and slipped back to her room, hiding the photos in a place only she knew. The next morning, she faced Alexander with a calm she hadn't felt in months. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time she wasn't afraid. Because now she had power, real power, the kind of power that could finally set her free. And one day soon, when the time was right, she would use it to destroy him. The days passed in a tense equilibrium. Alexander continued his routine, treating Sofia like a prized possession he had regained control over. He started to test her more often, giving her just a little more freedom, allowing her to have brief phone calls to close friends under his supervision, letting her attend dinner parties with other affluent couples, and even gifting her small trinkets to reward her good behavior. To anyone else, it looked like they were rebuilding their marriage, like he was the loving husband helping his wife recover from some undefined trauma. But Sofia knew better. Every smile he gave her, every compliment he paid in public was a performance, a subtle reminder of the power he held over her. And every time she played the role of the grateful wife, a fire burned inside her, a fire fed by every humiliating glance he shot her way, every time he mentioned Leon in passing with a smirk. It was as if he was daring her to try something, to rebel. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. Not yet. Sofia's life became a balancing act, earning Alexander's trust just enough to push his boundaries without raising suspicion. She began engaging more in conversations at the parties he took her to, regaining her confidence little by little. She found that Alexander seemed to enjoy showing her off, as if reclaiming his wife in front of his business associates was a mark of his victory. It worked to her advantage. The more she appeared subdued and cooperative, the less he paid attention to what she did behind the scenes. One evening, at a high-profile charity event hosted by one of Alexander's closest business partners, Sofia found herself standing beside him as he mingled with the city's elite. She was dressed in a shimmering black gown, her hair styled to perfection, playing the part of the elegant, devoted wife to perfection. Alexander's hand rested possessively on her lower back as they navigated through the crowd. But Sofia's attention was elsewhere. She noticed a particular guest, a man in his mid-40s with a stern expression and sharp eyes. He was someone she had seen before, someone who had been mentioned in the very documents she had photographed weeks ago. His name was Viktor Ivanov, a powerful businessman with deep ties to the criminal underworld. Alexander had been working with him in secret, laundering money through several shell companies. The evidence Sofia had captured linked Viktor directly to Alexander's dirty dealings. If there was anyone who could bring Alexander to his knees, it was Viktor. The moment came when Alexander stepped away to speak privately with a few investors. Sofia seized the opportunity, casually moving toward Viktor, her heart racing. She introduced herself with a charming smile, her voice soft and controlled. "Mr. Ivanov, I don't believe we've had the pleasure of meeting. I'm Sofia Volkov." Viktor glanced at her, his gaze assessing. "Mrs. Volkov, yes, I've heard a lot about you." His voice was neutral, almost disinterested, but Sofia detected the curiosity behind his eyes. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "I know who you are too, and I think we have something to discuss, something that might be of mutual interest." Viktor's expression didn't change, but a flicker of intrigue crossed his face. He glanced around, then nodded subtly. "Follow me." He led her to a quiet corner of the event hall, away from prying eyes. Sofia's pulse pounded in her ears. One wrong move, one word out of place, and everything could fall apart. "What do you want, Mrs. Volkov?" Victor asked, his tone calm but firm. "And why do you think you have something I'd be interested in?" Sofia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I know about the money laundering, the shell companies. I know about your arrangement with Alexander." She paused, gauging his reaction. Victor's face remained unreadable, but she pressed on. "And I have proof. Enough to bury both of you." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, a dangerous edge creeping into his voice. "You have proof," he repeated softly. "You, of all people?" "I do," Sofia said, lifting her chin slightly. "And I'm willing to give it to you, under one condition." Victor stared at her for a long moment, then slowly crossed his arms. "And what condition would that be?" "Get me out of here," she whispered, her voice fierce. "Get me away from Alexander. He thinks he owns me, that I'm too afraid to fight back. But I'm not. I want a new life, far from here. And in exchange, I'll give you everything you need to destroy him." Victor's gaze bored into her, as if trying to peel away the layers of her facade. Finally, a slow smile spread across his face. "You're braver than I thought, Mrs. Volkov. Or perhaps just more desperate." "Maybe a bit of both," she admitted. "But I'm serious. I have nothing left to lose." Victor's smile widened, revealing a hint of amusement. "Very well. I'll consider your proposition. But know this. If you're lying, if this is some kind of trap, you'll wish Alexander had dealt with you himself." "It's no trap," Sofia replied firmly. "I'm done being his pawn. This is the only way I can be free." With that, Victor nodded once. "I'll be in touch. Don't do anything foolish in the meantime." Sofia returned to Alexander's side, her heart still racing, but a small spark of hope ignited within her. She had made her move. Now all she could do was wait. Over the next few days, nothing seemed to change. Alexander continued his routine, oblivious to the quiet war his wife had declared against him. But Sofia noticed subtle shifts, a phone call that ended abruptly when she entered the room, or a fleeting look of concern on his face that he quickly masked. She knew Victor was working behind the scenes, laying the groundwork. Then, one night, as Sofia sat alone in the study, a message appeared on her phone. It was a single line of text. "Tomorrow night, 11 p.m., the back entrance. Be ready." Sofia's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. She quickly deleted the message and forced herself to remain calm, to act normal, but the anticipation coiled inside her like a spring ready to snap. The next day passed in a blur. She went through the motions, nodding at Alexander's comments over breakfast, feigning interest in a conversation with one of his business associates. All the while her mind raced with the plan. At exactly 10:45 p.m., she excused herself, claiming a headache, and retreated to her room. She packed quickly, taking only what she needed, a change of clothes, her passport, and the small USB drive containing the photos of Alexander's incriminating documents. Her heart hammered in her chest as she slipped out of the bedroom and crept down the stairs, every creak of the floorboards sending jolts of fear through her. When she reached the back entrance, she paused, listening intently. The house was silent. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped outside into the cool night air. A black car waited at the end of the driveway, its engine idling softly. The rear window rolled down, and Victor's face appeared in the shadows. "Get in," he said quietly. Sofia hesitated only for a moment before rushing forward and sliding into the car. The door shut behind her, sealing her fate. "Did you bring the evidence?" Victor asked, his tone businesslike. Sofia handed him the USB drive, her hands shaking slightly. "Everything's on there. Every deal, every account. It's all yours." Victor nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket. "Good. I've arranged for you to disappear just as we agreed. But remember, Sofia, if you ever think of crossing me, I can find you. There's no place you can hide that I won't reach." "I understand," Sofia whispered. "Just get me away from him." Victor leaned back, a satisfied smile on his lips. "Don't worry. By the time Alexander realizes what's happened, you'll be long gone." The car pulled away, the mansion shrinking in the distance as they drove into the night. Sofia stared out the window, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, relief, and something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. She was finally free, but as the city lights blurred past, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end. One day she would come back, and when she did, Alexander would finally pay for everything he'd done. Because Sofia Volkov wasn't broken, she was reborn, and she would make sure Alexander never forgot it. The plane touched down on a private airstrip just outside of Prague under the cover of darkness. Sofia stepped off the jet, the cold air biting at her skin as she wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders. Victor's people had arranged everything: the flight, the new identity, even a place to stay that no one would ever think to look for her. But as she looked at the sprawling, unfamiliar city in the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that her escape was only temporary. Her new life began in a small but elegant apartment on the top floor of an old building overlooking the Vltava River. The place was beautifully furnished, yet devoid of any personal touches. It was a place to hide, not to live. Victor had made it clear that he would protect her, for now, but she needed to lie low. Any hint of her whereabouts leaking back to Alexander would mean the end of their fragile agreement. The first few weeks were a haze of isolation and paranoia. Sofia stayed inside most days, staring at the same four walls, her thoughts swirling with memories of Leon and the last horrific moments they'd shared. She replayed every second in her mind: Alexander's cold gaze, the men who had dragged her away, Leon's lifeless eyes staring up at the sky. The pain was unbearable, but it fueled a determination that grew stronger each day. One evening, a knock at the door startled her. Sofia's heart leapt into her throat. She hadn't been expecting anyone, and no one knew she was here. She hesitated, then slowly approached the door, her hand shaking as she turned the lock. Standing on the other side was a woman she didn't recognize, tall, with striking features and a sharp, appraising gaze. She wore a tailored suit, exuding an air of confidence and authority. "Mrs. Volkov," the woman said with a faint smile. "Or should I say, Ms. Novak, now that you're under my care." Sofia's mind raced. She knew this woman must be connected to Victor, but she couldn't hide her confusion. "Who are you?" The woman stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I'm someone who ensures Victor Ivanov's investments remain secure. My name is Elena." "Investments?" Sofia echoed, frowning. "Is that what I am now?" "Let's not sugarcoat things," Elena replied smoothly. "Victor saved you because he saw an opportunity. The information you provided will be useful, but only if we leverage it carefully. And that means keeping you alive and under the radar." Sofia nodded slowly, understanding dawning. She had traded one prison for another, albeit with more freedom. "So what's the plan?" "Right now, you need to get comfortable with your new identity. We've set up bank accounts, paperwork, everything you need to establish yourself here. You're a Czech art dealer now, with ties to several prominent galleries in the city. It's a role that will give you a reason to move within certain circles without drawing too much attention." Elena handed her a small envelope. Inside were documents, her new passport, residency permit, and a portfolio detailing her fictitious background. Sofia glanced through them, impressed by the thoroughness. "But why this?" Sofia asked, still unsure. "Why an art dealer?" "Because it's close enough to your past life to seem plausible, but far enough from Alexander's world to give you a cover," Elena explained. "And more importantly, it gives you access to people who can help us undermine him." "Undermine him?" Sofia's voice trembled with a mix of fear and excitement. Elena's smile widened, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Yes, Victor doesn't want Alexander destroyed in a blaze of glory that would draw too much attention. He wants him eroded, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And you, Ms. Novak, will be instrumental in making that happen." Sofia's pulse quickened. For the first time since she'd fled, she felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just running away, she was becoming a weapon aimed straight at Alexander's heart. Over the next few months, Sofia threw herself into her new role. She attended gallery openings, mingled with artists and collectors, carefully building her new persona as the mysterious and cultured Aneta Novak. She was cautious, avoiding direct ties to anyone from her old life, yet she still found ways to feed small bits of information back to Victor and his associates. Each piece was a thread that, when pulled, began to unravel Alexander's carefully constructed empire. The process was slow and methodical. One by one, some of Alexander's closest allies found themselves entangled in legal troubles. A seemingly minor piece of property he owned in Paris was seized by authorities due to unexpected tax violations. Another lucrative business deal in Berlin fell apart when crucial permits were suddenly revoked. Each setback was small on its own, but together they chipped away at his influence and power. Sofia's confidence grew with each victory. She began to embrace her new identity, the lines between Sofia Volkov and Aneta Novak blurring. Yet, in the quiet moments when she was alone in her apartment, the loneliness and grief would crash over her like a wave. She had lost so much: Leon, her freedom, her old self. But she pushed those feelings down, channeling everything into her mission. One evening, Elena appeared at her door again, a knowing smile on her face. "We've made progress," Elena said, handing Sofia a small USB drive. "This is the final nail in his coffin." Sofia took the drive, a mixture of anticipation and fear churning in her stomach. "What's on it?" "Enough to tie Alexander to a series of illegal arms deals. Once this is released, his business will crumble. But we need you to deliver it, Sofia. You're the only one who can." Sofia stared at the drive, the weight of it pressing down on her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. But it was also the most dangerous. If Alexander discovered her involvement, he wouldn't stop until she was dead. "Where do I take it?" she asked quietly. "There's a journalist in London. He's been investigating Alexander's dealings for years, but never had enough proof to go public. You'll meet him, hand this over, and disappear. After that, you're free." "Free," Sofia repeated softly. It sounded so simple, yet she knew it was anything but. Elena nodded. "Victor's arranged for you to leave the country immediately after. A new identity, a new life, somewhere far away from all of this." Sofia glanced up, meeting Elena's gaze. "And what about Alexander?" Elena's smile was cold. "When this goes live, he'll be too busy fighting to save his empire to come after you. But don't worry, if he does, Victor will deal with him." Sofia took a deep breath, then nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The next day, Sofia boarded a flight to London, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. She had never felt so alive, so dangerously close to the edge. When she landed, she made her way to a small cafe where the meeting was set to take place. The journalist, a tall man with sharp eyes and a cautious demeanor, greeted her with a nod. They exchanged only a few words, enough to confirm identities, before Sofia slid the USB drive across the table. "This is it," she whispered. "Everything you need to bring him down." He glanced at the drive, then back at her. "You realize what this means. He'll be finished, but so will you, if anyone finds out you were involved." Sofia nodded. "I know, but I have to do this." The journalist slipped the drive into his pocket. "I'll make sure the world knows the truth. And good luck. Eminem's Novak." With that, he left, disappearing into the crowded London streets. Sofia sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty chair across from her. It was done. Alexander's reign of terror was about to end. She should have felt relief, triumph, but all she felt was an empty hollowness. Leaving the cafe, she made her way to the address Elena had given her, a small flat where she was supposed to wait until the next leg of her escape was arranged. She paced the room, the silence unbearable. Then, just as she was about to sit down, her phone buzzed. It was a single message from an unknown number. "Did you really think you could hide from me, Sofia? Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering in her chest. "You're mine, and I'm coming for you." Sofia dropped the phone, her hands shaking. He had found her. No matter what she did, no matter how far she ran, Alexander would never let her go. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. She had to leave. Now. Grabbing her bag, she sprinted to the door, but as she reached for the handle, a shadow moved on the other side. The door burst open, and Sofia stumbled back, terror flooding her veins. Standing there, his eyes dark with fury, was Alexander. He stepped inside, the room seeming to shrink around him as he closed the distance between them. "Hello, Sofia," he murmured, his voice a low growl. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" Sofia's back hit the wall, her heart pounding in her ears. She was trapped. "You've been a very, very bad girl," Alexander continued, his gaze raking over her with a dangerous intensity. "And now, it's time to face the consequences." Sofia's breath caught in her throat as Alexander loomed over her. His presence filled the room like a dark cloud, suffocating her. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't think. She had come so far, done everything to escape, and yet here he was, standing in front of her like a nightmare made real. "Alexander, how did you find me?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempts to sound strong. He tilted his head, a cruel smile curling on his lips. "Did you really believe Victor would protect you forever? That he would risk everything for a woman who betrayed her own husband? You underestimated me, Sofia. You underestimated us." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Victor, he had betrayed her. The so-called protection, the escape plan, the new identity, it was all a facade. She had been a pawn in a game far more dangerous than she'd imagined, used to deliver the final blow to Alexander's empire. And now, with her purpose served, she was disposable. "I trusted him," she murmured, more to herself than to Alexander. "Victor was always on my side," Alexander said, his tone almost mocking. "He and I had a little understanding. He'd help me deal with a troublesome wife, and in return, I'd share a few assets that no longer suited me. He gets richer, and I get you." Sofia's eyes burned with unshed tears of anger and betrayal. She had been played from the start. Every move, every step she'd taken had been orchestrated by Alexander. The documents, the USB drive, it had all been part of his plan. You killed Leon," she spat, the words like poison on her tongue. "You ruined my life." Alexander's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard look. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out to grasp her chin roughly. "No, Sofia. You ruined your life the moment you thought you could betray me. Everything that's happened is because of your choices. And now, you're going to pay for them." He released her abruptly, causing her to stumble back. She struggled to stay on her feet, her mind racing. She had to get out. There had to be a way. But as if reading her thoughts, Alexander turned to the doorway. He nodded once, and two of his men stepped inside, blocking her only exit. She was trapped. "Take her to the car," Alexander ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "We're going home." The men moved toward her, and Sofia's panic surged. "No, I'm not going anywhere with you," she screamed, backing away until she hit the wall. One of the men grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. She struggled, kicking and clawing, but it was no use. They overpowered her easily, dragging her toward the door. She looked over her shoulder, meeting Alexander's gaze one last time. "You'll never break me," she hissed, defiance blazing in her eyes despite the fear coursing through her veins. Alexander's lips curved into a chilling smile. "Oh, Sofia, breaking you is just the beginning." The next few hours were a blur. Sofia was shoved into a car, her wrists bound tightly behind her back. The drive was long, the silence inside the vehicle heavy and oppressive. Every time she tried to speak, the men would silence her with a warning glare. She stared out the window, watching the city lights fade into darkness as they drove further and further away. When the car finally stopped, Sofia was yanked out and dragged into a large, unfamiliar estate. It was secluded, surrounded by high walls and security gates. Not Alexander's primary mansion, this place was different. Isolated, designed to keep secrets. She was shoved into a dimly lit room and pushed into a chair. Her wrists were unbound only to be strapped to the armrests with thick leather cuffs. Her ankles were secured in place, and a tight strap was fastened around her waist, pinning her to the seat. "Make yourself comfortable," one of the men sneered before stepping back. They left her alone, the door slamming shut with a finality that made her heart drop. Sofia struggled against the restraints, but it was useless. She was completely immobilized. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to take deep breaths. She couldn't give in to the panic. Not yet. The door creaked open, and Sofia's eyes snapped open as Alexander stepped inside, his gaze fixed on her with a chilling intensity. "Welcome to your new home," he murmured, gesturing around the room. "This is where you'll stay until I decide otherwise." Sofia's pulse pounded in her ears. "Why are you doing this? Why can't you just let me go?" Alexander moved closer, his expression hardening. "Because you're mine, Sofia. You always have been. You thought you could run. You thought you could outsmart me, but now you'll learn your place. And you'll learn it the hard way." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, sleek tablet. He swiped through it, then turned the screen toward her. Sofia's breath hitched as she saw the image, a live feed from a camera inside a dark room. A man sat slumped against the wall, his face bruised and bloodied. It was Victor. "He thought he could play both sides," Alexander said softly. "Thought he could use you to weaken me. But in the end, he's just another pawn, and pawns are meant to be sacrificed." Sofia's heart twisted. Victor had betrayed her, but seeing him like this, broken, defeated, made her realize just how deep Alexander's power ran. There was no escaping him. No one could defy him and survive. "I'm going to ask you one question, Sofia," Alexander continued, his gaze boring into her. "And I want you to think very carefully before you answer." He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "Are you ready to submit? To become mine again, completely and utterly?" Sofia stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of fear and defiance. She wanted to scream at him, to curse him, to fight back, but she knew that whatever answer she gave, he would twist it to his advantage. He always did. So she did the only thing she could. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'll never be yours again." Silence filled the room. Then she felt his hand on her cheek, a surprisingly gentle touch. "We'll see about that," he murmured softly. And with that he straightened and left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Sofia sat there, the restraints digging into her skin, her heart pounding with fear. She was alone, trapped in a house with a man who would stop at nothing to break her. But as the minutes turned into hours, a strange calm settled over her. She had faced death, betrayal, and pain, and yet she was still here, still fighting. No matter what Alexander did, no matter how hard he tried, he would never truly own her. He might imprison her, torment her, try to bend her to his will, but he would never have her spirit. Sofia Volkov was not a victim. She was a survivor, and one day she would make him pay. Even if it was the last thing she ever did. Sofia sat alone in the dark room, feeling the weight of the restraints pinning her to the chair. Hours turned into days, days into weeks. Alexander would visit sporadically, taunting her, threatening her, trying to break her, but she refused to give him the satisfaction. She said nothing, showed no emotion, not even when he whispered that she would rot in this house forever. But deep down, Sofia knew she couldn't hold on like this forever. She needed a plan. She needed a way out. One evening, just as she was beginning to lose hope, the door swung open. But instead of Alexander, it was Elena, her face bruised, her eyes wide with urgency. Sofia's heart raced as Elena rushed to her side, fumbling with the restraints. "What are you doing?" Sofia whispered, too stunned to move as the leather straps fell away. "Saving you," Elena muttered, her voice low and strained. "We don't have much time. Alexander's out. I've disabled the security cameras, but he'll know something's wrong soon. Sofia rubbed her sore wrists, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Why are you helping me? I thought you were working with him. I was, Elena admitted, glancing nervously at the door. But things have changed. Victor was my brother. Sofia's breath caught in her throat. Your brother? Elena nodded, her jaw clenched. Alexander didn't just want him out of the picture. He had him killed. After you left London, he had Victor tortured for information and executed. She swallowed hard, fury flickering in her eyes. So now I want revenge, and you're my best chance. The revelation hit Sofia like a tidal wave. Elena's cold, calculating demeanor had been masking a deep, personal vendetta. For the first time, she saw the pain etched in the woman's features. Elena, I'm so sorry, Sofia whispered. No time for apologies, Elena snapped, grabbing Sofia's arm and pulling her to her feet. We need to get out of here now. Sofia nodded, adrenaline surging through her as they rushed out of the room and down a long, dimly lit hallway. The house seemed to be asleep, eerily silent. They moved quickly, Elena leading the way with the precision of someone who knew the estate inside and out. They reached the garage, and Elena gestured to a sleek black car. Get in, she ordered, sliding into the driver's seat. Sofia didn't hesitate. She climbed into the passenger's seat, her pulse pounding. The engine roared to life, and they shot out of the garage, tires screeching on the gravel driveway. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sofia felt a glimmer of hope. They were going to make it. She was going to be free. But as they sped down the winding road away from the estate, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror fast, gaining on them. Damn it, Elena cursed, slamming the accelerator. He must have realized already. The car behind them closed the distance at an alarming speed. Sofia glanced back, her stomach twisting in fear. What do we do? Hold on, Elena muttered through gritted teeth. She swerved sharply, taking a sudden turn down a narrow dirt road. The car behind them followed, the gap shrinking. Sofia's heart pounded as she clung to her seat, every bump and jolt sending shockwaves through her body. The chase continued, Elena maneuvering the car with desperate skill. But it wasn't enough. The pursuing vehicle rammed into their rear bumper, sending them skidding wildly. The car spun out of control, crashing into a tree. The impact threw Sofia forward, her head slamming against the dashboard. Dazed and bleeding, Sofia struggled to focus as the driver's side door was wrenched open. Alexander stood there, his face twisted with rage. Get out, he snarled, dragging her out of the wrecked car. He tossed her onto the ground like a rag doll, then turned his gaze to Elena, who was slumped over the steering wheel, barely conscious. You really thought you could betray me, Elena? Alexander growled, pulling a gun from his coat. I'll make sure you regret. But before he could finish, a shot rang out. Alexander staggered, his hand clutching his side. He turned, eyes wide with shock. Sofia stood there, a gun in her trembling hands, Elena's gun. The one she had grabbed from the glove compartment just moments before the crash. You! Alexander choked out, blood seeping through his fingers. Sofia's gaze was steady, her voice firm. You'll never control me again. Alexander took a step toward her, fury blazing in his eyes. But before he could reach her, another gunshot echoed through the night. This time, Alexander crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Sofia stood there, staring at his body, her chest heaving. She had done it. She had killed the man who had ruined her life, who had tormented her for so long. But instead of feeling relief, a strange emptiness washed over her. Elena groaned, pulling herself out of the wrecked car. She glanced at Alexander's body, then at Sofia, and a slow, weary smile spread across her face. It's over, Elena whispered, staggering toward her. But Sofia shook her head slowly, the gun still clutched in her hand. No, it's not. Elena's smile faltered. What do you mean? Sofia turned the gun toward Elena, her eyes cold and distant. You knew, didn't you? You knew Victor was working with Alexander. You knew the entire time, and you used me, just like they did. Elena's eyes widened. Sofia, wait, But Sofia's finger tightened on the trigger. A single shot rang out. Elena's body crumpled to the ground beside Alexander's. Sofia stood over them, the silence of the night pressing in around her. She looked down at the two people who had manipulated and betrayed her, who had torn her life apart. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Everyone she had trusted had used her. No one had ever truly cared. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she dropped the gun, her hands shaking uncontrollably. What had she become? Who was she now? Slowly, she turned and walked away from the scene, leaving the bodies behind. She didn't know where she was going or what she would do next. All she knew was that she was finally free, but at a price she could never repay. Sofia disappeared into the darkness, her silhouette fading as dawn broke on the horizon. She had no name, no past, and no future. But in that emptiness, she found something she hadn't expected, a twisted, haunting sense of peace. She was no longer Sofia Volkov. She was no one. And for the first time in her life, being no one meant she could become anyone, because the world would never see her coming.